That was marvelous. I went to seminary 20 years ago, and there were classes that I was required to take, Old Testament and the Hebrew that went with it, and New Testament and the Hebrew that went with that, and I took theology, church polity, and even Jungian psychology on the way to a Master of Divinity degree. But none of these prepared me for the theology of chairs. Apparently, the arrangement of chairs has deep meaning. I have given sermons that have not raised a single comment or response. But without fail, whenever I've changed chairs in the meeting room, opinions are expressed. At my first parish, we had 3 worship spaces, and each one I had to arrange chairs. The school cafeteria had the chairs on long racks in the closets. We even had to fold up tables and move them all around. And then we moved to this little church basement, which was just like L-shaped, and it was, how do you fit chairs in this tiny, tiny space and even have it resemble? It was the basement of a bank. You know, it was not really a very worshipful space. So we went to a place that had more sacred air, the Masonic Temple, and they had special sacred chairs that we were forbidden to use. And then I came to Winston-Salem, a congregation that chooses to express its diversity by having many types of chairs in its sanctuary. But this space is not officially our sanctuary. This room is the fellowship hall. It's designed to be where we hold dinners and potlucks. We moved into this building 10 years ago on Easter, and this building was designed for expansion. The fellowship said, well, this will be sufficient and affordable for 200 members. And then when we get 400 members, we'll build a sanctuary there in the middle. Well, we're at 300. We're kind of in the middle and an in-between place. Getting too big for this room, but not quite big enough for another room. Attendance this year has been averaging around 150, up from our yearly average of 135, and probably when the summer attendance happens, we might go down again in our yearly average. Last week, we had 40 children added to the 145 people in here, so it was pretty crowded in here, had 195 bodies. Now, what is the capacity of this room? Well, I took some time this week, and I figured that if I started a row at that wall and I could fit 12 rows of 10 with a center aisle, and there'd be 240 chairs that could fit in here. Now, that wouldn't necessarily increase our capacity. Just putting in more chairs doesn't mean fitting more people in. If we use skinnier chairs, we could probably fit 300 chairs in this place. But alas, we would probably remain the same size. And we might even have a drop-off in attendance because no one would want to sit in uncomfortable chairs. A second thing that's wrong with 240 seats, 24 10-seat rows, is that people like aisle seats. Each week when you come in here, it looks like it's full. But from the pulpit, I see this empty space kind of in the middle here. Because the people who come early sit on the end, and the people who come later don't want to go, excuse me, pardon me. So aisles allow people to sneak in late. And just another note, if you are late and sneaking in, if you just kind of walk in and sit down, you'll be less noticed than this maneuver. Then there are the people who mill around in the back. I'm not sure if they do this because they can't find a seat, or if they're like the ne'er-do-wells who used to hang out in the back of Mrs. Green's 5th grade class. I think those in the back row should check your hair for spitballs before you go into the public. A third problem with 240 chairs in the fellowship hall is conformity. In order to fit that many, they'd have to be tightly arranged in straight rows and orders, and the people on the wings would have to crane their neck and change the way they sit and the orientation of their head. And we are not the type of congregation that forces people to change their orientation. So we have chairs in 3 directions with a variety of perspectives. What I'm talking about is welcoming capacity. Welcoming capacity, though, is much more than how many chairs. It's about how are we prepared to welcome people to the fellowship. It involves inviting them, greeting them. But if more people came in our door, where would we put them? How would we involve them in the life of our fellowship? How do we make room in our lives for other people? Now, as an institution, there are several solutions, and the 2 most obvious: 1, build a sanctuary; 2, hold a second service. The sanctuary idea costs money. The advantage is that we all get to stay together in one room. 2 services cost time and a lot of energy. It might even be cheaper than money. But we would not be meeting with each other all together each Sunday. We'd have to take that extra time to communicate, to make sure things are doing. Would we have music in both services? Would we have RE in both services? We are somewhere in between. And wouldn't you know, there's a church consultant who wrote a book called The In-Between Church. And Alice Mann says there's several things to consider when forming a new service. Because of churches that do begin a new service, 8 of 10 will experience a measurable increase in total worship attendance and total giving. When a church is less than 40% full, which isn't our problem, the new service is especially appropriate because the current service is unlikely to grow and is unlikely to be impacted negatively. That means you have 40% in your building. This is for a small church that might just not be growing anymore, and they just have to do something totally different to attract people in the community. Adding a service is a touchier matter at 60 to 80%. So if we have 150 people in here when we're got 200 chairs, we're about 75%. We're kind of in this place. And a new service may well draw off some of the strength of the existing service. Now, if a church is filled 80 to 100% each Sunday, it's recommended to create an identical service that's exactly the same with exactly the choir and exactly the same RE, because it's working. You just have to do the same thing again. The worst way, we tried a new service a couple summers ago, and I wish I would have read this because it would have really helped me save some time, because this is precisely what I did. The worst way to launch a new worship service is to start small and hope it will grow. It is perfectly normal for a new service to decline 20 to 50% during the first few months if it is inaugurated. You should plan to start big enough to ensure that the attendance does not fall below critical mass. And they talk about 2 attendance goals. Goal number 1, 50 people, or 35% of the largest service, and that comes to 48 people. So basically, 50 people. And attendance goal number 2, 35% of those in attendance should be unchurched, the people who aren't already coming. And then the room capacity goal. The meeting room should be filled up to at least 50%, and so it may be better to meet in a facility other than the sanctuary. Now, this is unique for us because if we had a service of 50 people in here, this place would feel kind of too empty. So it'd be good if we built and had that little small sanctuary to start the second service. But, all these issues kind of wrap in around each other. We're at that tricky 60 to 80% capacity. A second service would initially make this service smaller. Service should be similar enough to build on this service's strengths, but different enough to attract new people. And then who are these new people? We live in a town with several colleges, but we have no college outreach. We live in a town that's 37% black and 9% Hispanic. No, we don't meet that demographic. How would we have to change in order to be more diverse? Only about 45% of our own members attend service. So maybe we should ask them, what would it take to get you to attend service? "48 people. Would there be 48 people in this room who would be willing to dedicate themselves to coming to church at a different time for a whole year to make sure that that service gets started? Will we have 2 services that grow that allow us to build the sanctuary? But building the sanctuary and having 2 services can't be goals in themselves. We don't want people for the sake of people. We're not pursuing growth for the sake of growth. There's a broader understanding of why we seek to grow. And I call it welcoming capacity. And those words by Clarence Skinner that were read at the top of our service. A free religion is constantly endeavoring to surpass itself, to outgrow itself, to challenge the fundamentals of existence to whatever new revelations may come with the dawn. Each of us joined or visited this fellowship for a reason. If we joined because we had a sense that it was just right. But every time another person joins, it changes a little. So sometimes people are afraid of growth and growth strategies. We tend to forget that every time somebody leaves, the congregation also changes a little. Keeping things the same is impossible. Welcoming capacity involves being willing to change. As some of our members age and are able to do less, we can no longer assume that things just happen. Older members may need assistance to make it to the service. It's not enough that we were welcoming to them 30 years ago. Are we welcoming to them right now? Parents with small children have child care needs. The more we help them, the more welcoming we will be. Some people are searching for a new understanding of spirituality. If we have more adult education classes, we can increase our welcoming capacity. Welcoming capacity involves welcoming change. Change in our congregation and change in ourselves. Simple acts can reflect increased welcoming capacity. Simply shifting away from the aisle allows people to come into the fellowship. You may have been sitting in the same seat for 10 years, but some Sunday you might need to move. We do not know how many people do not stay, visit and do not stay, because the fellowship seems so crowded and it's hard for them to find their place. Or even turn away when they see that the parking lot is full and there might be, well, there are no spaces back there. We must allow ourselves to be changed by the people we welcome into our lives. We're teaching a class today in orientation class, and one of the classes that we teach in the orientation process is the discernment, or we go around the circle and people tell their journey of how they got here, how they were raised, and how they found their way to this interesting and unique congregation. And that's my favorite part of the whole exercise, because we sit around and we learn about each other's stories. I wonder what would happen if we continued to do that exercise all the time. Small groups where people just tell each other's stories and create that intimacy that we had when we were a small congregation where everybody knew everyone. There's an old proverb. You can never step into the same river twice. Every time we step into the flow of this fellowship, it's a different community. We need to continue to welcome each other and help each other manage the change. Take a moment now. Think of someone you used to see here all the time. Maybe you haven't seen them in a couple of years. What would happen if you just called them? Said, hey, we have Earth Day this weekend. Hey, we have the auction. Our lives get busy and we forget people. People's lives get busy and they forget us. But just taking that extra expansion of our welcoming capacity to just remember people who we used to be close to and remind them that there is still a community here. What barriers do we create without knowing? How do we sit socially that prevents others from finding a seat among us? How do we welcome theological diversity? How do we welcome ethnic diversity? How do we welcome age diversity and gender and orientation diversity? Building welcoming capacity means moving out of our comfort zones. Perhaps sitting somewhere else in the congregation, maybe at another time, maybe next to someone new. We have to look deeply into ourselves and find the barriers that prevent us from welcoming more people. Becoming more open involves personal growth. It takes courage to get to know oneself better, and to find some of those barriers that you might be putting up might not be a pretty thing to look at in yourself. And it also takes courage to reach out to one another. It's like, will they just feel bothered if I call them? Well, if they do, they do. But more likely, they'll be surprised and happy to hear from you. It is this willingness to embrace our full potential, to live the way we want the world to be. That's welcoming capacity. If we believe that Unitarian Universalism is good for us, it's natural to want to share that joy. We are a people of faith that reinvents itself, not satisfied with old solutions. So growing is part of our challenge. If we stop trying to improve, we stagnate. We have something to give to the world. We no longer have the luxury of hiding our message of religious freedom and justice for all. As an institution, we need to increase our welcoming capacity. We need others to help fulfill our sense of mission. We cannot affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person if we do not take the effort to invite more people. And we need to care for them after they arrive. We must make room in our building. Simple things like keeping it clean makes it inviting. Opening it to the public makes it well known. We must make room in our programming. How will we serve the needs of children, young adults, and seniors? How will we deepen our understandings of humanism, Christianity, and paganism? But most of all, we must open our own hearts and minds to increase our personal welcoming capacity. Are we willing to do the work to be who we want to be? Are we willing to risk being transformed? And are we prepared to create a better future? This has been a sermon full of questions. And Greg and I, when we were talking about this sermon, thought that the simple talk back where I grab 5 people and pretend not to notice 10 others so the service doesn't run an hour is not going to work for a topic this big. And so those who want to continue to talk about these issues and who we are and what we need to do to grow, I invite you to stay after the postlude for a more extended talk-back session. At this time, I ask you to join with me in the words of offering found in your order of service.